The scope of the ISMS defines what areas of the business is covered by the certification. This is important when ensuring customers that the proper application, service, or tool is actually ISO certified. It is very easy to declare the whole business will be certified, but that's not practical. We have talked about context already. We have talked about interested parties. These two pieces put together is what help drives the next topic, defining the scope. A rookie mistake is to think you absolutely have to cover every control across your entire business. I know this because I did it. The fastest way to get an ISO 27001 program up and running is to start with a very specific scope. Development of an application, work of a team, a specific office if possible. If there is someone requiring you to have certification, maybe a contractual obligation. A limited scope limits the impact on the culture of the organization, along with the time and money considerations you need to take into account. So what do we mean by that? Well, the organizations are made up of many pieces and parts, from help desks to manufacturing space, developers, finance, and even building maintenance. Everything in scope of ISO 27001 will need to be audited. If you can narrow that down to maybe the development, networking, and help desk function to support the application, you can cut your prep and audit time in half. Or if you want to narrow it down more, maybe we only consider the process and functions of the help desk and payment processing. Another factor is locations and facilities. Certifying 3,000 employees across 5 offices on 3 different continents is a little different than 150 employees in a remote office who handle specific development. Data and functions crossing locations need to be factored in. This is important. Any part of the business not in scope is considered a third-party supplier and needs to be treated as such. If you decide to only place a 50-person development team at a remote location in scope, then the corporate headquarters is now a third-party entity to that office. Any communication, processing, and information crossing the border will need to be risk assessed accordingly. Now let's take a look at a sample scope. Development and supply from offices within the United States, Europe, and Asia. Here, we are setting the location as we may have an office in Australia or Africa that is now out of scope. Next, we are discussing the services and tools provided that we want to place into scope. Then finally, we walk through the controls that will apply. This is just a general comment, not really required to be in there, but helps to focus the scope. My advice? Get advice. Scope drives so much of what you have to do and not do, and who has to do it. Talk to your executives about the current state and future state of the business, so you're not bringing parts of the business into scope that aren't in the long-term plans. We're going to go back in the manual now to discuss in more detail the section on the scope. As mentioned multiple times over, the scope is probably the most important piece, as this helps keep the project focused. The scope here in Doc A1 covers development and supply of the widget in specific offices. It then drills down on this a little, clarifying bits like, for example, the scope covers all staff and contractors. Then exactly what locations the scope covers. It is important to not be general for the sake of being general. Detail is key here, and like I mentioned, because so much builds off one part, get help. Don't wing this. Research, consult, and find the right scope for your organization.